We're back. There's been a lot of attention paid to Jack Kennedy as we approach the 50th anniversary of his tragic death next Friday. Well, that day in Dallas made an indelible mark in our country, I can tell you. We all know it. But unlike the abrupt end of his presidency, Kennedy's influence continued over the years, undiminished. The impact of that legacy can be traced through the presidencies of his 9 predecessors in office, from LBJ to President Obama. Founder and director of the University of Virginia's Center for Politics, Larry Sabato, explores Kennedy's lasting influence in his new book, The Kennedy Half Century. He joins us now. Larry, go on, just make the point. I want to give you a couple minutes. Make the point of how Kennedy, I know I agree with you, has had an influence that have gone well beyond his short time in office.
Chris, it was really remarkable. Most of this book is about his legacy, and we looked at it in 2 different ways. We scoured the presidential record for Kennedy's 9 successors in the White House, from LBJ to Obama. And we found that Kennedy was the most cited former president. Now, why do they cite a former president so often? They want to use Kennedy's words and deeds to get their own agendas accomplished. And why do they do that? They do it because he was very popular and is very popular. We did a massive study, the largest public opinion study ever done on a historical figure. We found that Kennedy is by far the most popular post-World War II president, and I think you'll be interested in this, Chris, he is the only president with a tripartisan profile. That is, he is very popular with Democrats, Republicans, and independents. All of the other presidents mainly drew support from their own partisans, not the other party or independents.
Yeah, I like the poll that I found a couple of years ago that said that people think he deserves most to be on Mount Rushmore. That's my favorite because it says they think of him as a hero. Anyway, I want to go with your book here. When Vice President Johnson became president, he made it clear that he wanted to turn Kennedy's lofty objectives into reality. He expressed that determination in his first major speech to a joint session of Congress. Here's LBJ.
Today, in this moment of new resolve, I would say to all my fellow Americans, let us continue.
Well, President Johnson would go on to publicly invoke Kennedy's name over 500 times in his public speeches. Johnson immediately shepherded Kennedy's civil rights ambitions into law. Of course, Johnson had an ambitious agenda of his own, and yet he lamented that he couldn't escape the shadow of the Kennedy administration. You know, that was the problem here, and I keep thinking, now Nixon's a good example. I've written about those 2 guys. Nixon really was haunted by the glamour, the eloquence, the beauty of the Kennedy administration, and he used to go to his speechwriters and say, why can't you write like those guys did?
Yeah, no, that's right. And of course, in your book on Kennedy and Nixon, I think you showed people just how good friends they were when they came into Congress. And early in the 1950s, they had no idea they were going to be adversaries in 1960. But what I found that complements what you found, Chris, is that during the Nixon administration, Nixon was publicly and privately obsessed with Ted Kennedy. He worried about him running against him in '72, even after Chappaquiddick. But privately, he was really also obsessed with John F. Kennedy. He kept comparing his record to John F. Kennedy and complaining to staffers about how Kennedy didn't have a quarter of the record that he had, and if he had had John F. Kennedy's record, he'd be excoriated.
I know, it's all true. Let me ask you about the current president. What do you see in President Obama that, besides the oratory, the loftiness, what do you see him trying to do? Is it we're going for the record? Obviously, he's gotten more time than Kennedy to get something done, and healthcare is his big one.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, Kennedy had plans for Medicare. He hoped after a substantial re-election against Barry Goldwater, he would be able to get the Civil Rights Bill and Medicare and other things. He never had the chance. So President Obama has had the chance that President Kennedy didn't. But there are so many parallels there. Kennedy and Obama both broke a big barrier, one on Catholicism, the other on race. They were both short-termers in the Senate who really didn't care that much about Senate service. They were both distinguished authors who had sold a lot of books and had gotten a lot of praise for their writing ahead of being elected. And we all remember that President Obama might not be president today had he not been endorsed by Ted Kennedy and Caroline Kennedy right before Super Tuesday. That helped him gain that little edge in delegates that enabled him to beat Hillary Clinton in 2008.